Let's enter this now. The Western Cape ANC wants Dr. Naledi Pandor to be one of its 3 premier candidates. The party's provincial spokesperson, Khalid Syed, says he and legislature members Ayanda Bans are the other 2 candidates. Political analyst Dr. Ongama Mtimka is with me now in the studio for his thoughts. Good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
So I want us to start here first before we'll get to this nomination. Let's look at Dr. Naledi Pandor and her role in the party, and her role particularly of recently. Others are saying she would have been quite a key Cyril Ramaphosa ally, especially in coming into his administration, and her appointment particularly into a role of DIRCO was quite strategic in itself. How well has she fared? Is she a good diplomat? Did she fare well? Did she contribute well to Cyril Ramaphosa's growth strategy for foreign investment?
So leadership is as much about responding to opportunities effectively as it is about one's track record. We do know that within ANC politics, she had the stature of being someone who could be put in any position and succeed. The minister, I think that being placed strategically at DIRCO gave her the platform to leverage opportunities that were there to be able to build a profile. And it wasn't difficult for her because South Africa positions itself as a country that seeks to advance the Global South agenda. And there were very clear agendas in the international stage that were clearly Global South that allowed it to shoot into the limelight and actually consolidate a name for herself.
Did you do that though? Did she steer a stable portfolio even with the different, I suppose, issues that you had to deal with? US, China, Russia, US. Of course, we know her very clearly on the Israel-Palestine issue. Did she navigate that space well?
I think she fairly did. So the issue here is that I think she was assertive enough on the matters that South Africa wants to profile itself by, especially in the community of nations as a rules-based, as a campaigner for a rules-based international order. One cannot say with as much success on the Russia-Ukraine issue, but I think that there was deliberate efforts both on the part of the president and her to ensure that whatever negative publicity would have come from a stance that is pro-Russian, there's recovery from by making direct interventions in trying to mediate in the conflict. I think that they tried to navigate that conflict fairly well. With respect to U.S. relations and the implications of South Africa's continued alliance with the Global South agenda, I think she did as best as she could in terms of, engaging a counterpart in the U.S. and also South Africa making a concerted effort to remain within AGOA while at the same time assertive in the international stage as far as the voice that it wants to share in solidarity with the Global South. Now, there are times when being everything to everyone has got limitations. Yeah. But also there are consequences to making a particular choice, and sometimes those are choice of leadership that get made. I think that South Africa is in a precarious position as far as its relationship with Washington, but also Washington has got limited bandwidth in terms of how far it can push this game of punishing countries in the Global South for the stances that they take, because the backlash that has come, for example, with the sanctions against Russia, having this rapid de-dollarization among some of the key emerging markets, it's not a good response to Washington as far as Washington's interests are concerned to its coercive diplomacy strategy. I think that what's going to happen is that the U.S. is going to also be on a charm offensive that recognizes that in terms of how it relates with the countries in the Global South, it has to be a lot more measured. It has to be seen to be giving enough space for countries to take different policies, while at the same time it's going to be remaining as a superpower that's assertive about its own needs.
Yes. I wanted you to start there. Why I wanted you to start there? Because I want to come to this point to say, is she still a useful member of President Cyril Ramaphosa's cabinet for her to remain in Parliament, right? A week ago, I think Clayton Munyelo speaks for Durko, says, leave Naledi Pandor out of a list of people who are retiring from Parliament.
Sure.
She's not there. So in a sense, she has not expressed that view that says she wants to retire from Parliament. So does President Cyril Ramaphosa still need her there, or would she better serve as a premier in the Western Cape?
That's interesting. I think that she has been really great in cabinet. I think before that, I think it must have been science and technology, if I remember well. Yeah. She has been great there. But the ANC is up to a gambit in the Western Cape. It's interesting. I think the idea of her name coming must be viewed within within the politics of a party in the Western Cape that's battled to gain traction as far as its holistic broad church offering is concerned.
Right.
So it's a defensive strategy, in my view, to try and say, what if you play a lot more along this idea of somebody who's positioned herself as a champion for the freedom of Palestine. Now, it's a gambit because the assumptions that are made there are that the especially Muslim community in the Western Cape is significant to sway the vote to the ANC in significant ways. Now, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. How much of that becomes a reality on election day is going to be interesting. I mean, and by the way, this is introducing a very interesting topic to voter behavior in South Africa, and particularly in the Western Cape. Yeah. How much of foreign affairs actually plays a role? Now, if we've got the example...
If you ask John Steenhuisen, he'll tell you that it doesn't. The people of Western Cape are more interested in jobs, in corruption, in crime, and so on and so forth.
And by the way, he may be mostly right, because if you look at the U.S., the place where foreign policy among the competing presidents or presidential candidates becomes a big issue during debates, sometimes on election day, it's not what actually sways the vote. So it's an interesting gambit. I don't think that it's going to have zero effect. Yeah. And by the way, if you're the ANC and you've been failing to find something that makes you tick in the Western Cape, what do you do? And you've got some ammunition. I think they can test the idea and see what happens.
That's the question. Does the ANC have a Muslim vote issue in the Western Cape? Is that the ideal problem?
This is interesting. I mean, it makes for strategic discussions. The Palestinian issue is important in the not just the Muslim community, but human rights, from a human rights point of view. But how much of it, because remember also South Africa is in a precarious position there, because there are a lot of other interests on that issue as far as the choices of the South African population. A lot of people can sympathize, given our tendency to sympathize with the underdog generally, with the oppressed in Israel, Palestine. Not to the extent of, from the river to the sea narrative of either a completely, they may not be anti-Israel in the same way that they are pro-Palestine. They may be pro-Palestine, but in a typical South African way of complex nationhood, as opposed to have a sway from a Jewish community to a Muslim community in Palestine. And as a result of that, it may be that the South African voter may be the majority of the South African voter may be a lot more sophisticated than one-dimensional on that issue. And so what gains the ANC can make as a result of its stance may be counterbalanced by domestic issues, but also complex positions on the Middle East crisis.
It's Dr. Ongama Mtimka joining me tonight. This follows the prospect by the provincial ANC of possibly having 3 names, and along those names for premiership candidate is the name of Dr. Naledi Pandor. We're asking you the question, has she been good for the reputation of the party, enough so that she could certainly be a good candidate for the Western Cape to revive the ANC in that province? 072-110-5584. You can certainly weigh in on that conversation. Let's start right there. Has she been good for the reputation of the ANC, especially on the Israel-Palestine matter?
Notwithstanding some reservations that may be there among certain sections of South African society, I think that generally the net gain would be a positive one. We cannot underestimate the extent of brutality that's taking place in Palestine. I know about the history of October 7 and the events before then, but what is, flooding the media space is a one-sided war, in terms of which you see a lot more victims on the Palestinian side. And I think that we have it in ourselves as South Africans to actually stand with the underdog. This has been the case. So, notwithstanding some people who may wish that our government had a more neutral stance, and in fact, by the way, I'm also among some of the people who think that our stance may be a lot more constructive and seeking to transform the conflict there towards our way, by the way, because our way in South Africa is a way of constructing nationhood under very difficult circumstances. It took us a long time to get to that stage where we can say South Africa belongs to all who live in it. Yeah. And this becomes part of the liberation politics. Yeah. So we have a lot to offer as far as transforming that conflict to become more towards inclusive nationhood. But while people are being bombed, it's clear what side we need to be on until that time where both parties are able to say, let's construct a nationhood that is complex, that is inclusive, or in fact a two-state solution. So my sense is that notwithstanding some of those nuances, I think the net gain would be that of a positive, positive outlook. It's no child's play to be able to go into the international courts of justice to advance the cause of a people. People may say all they like about the need for neutrality, and as I say, I am among those people who are advancing that after litigation, we have a responsibility as a country that constructed nationhood under very difficult and painful circumstances to actually offer a more neutral hand, while, by the way, even if there's a slant towards in terms of our recent interpretation of history, the more oppressed
people. Yes. It's that question of inclusive nationhood that one would think is really at the heart of the problems of the ANC in the Western Cape. Others would say there were factional battles that would have weakened the ANC at the time, and they lost power and they lost focus and so on and so forth. Whether they have overcome that and they are back in the unity kind of formation at this particular point to impact that province, that question is still being asked. But others would say it is the inclusive nationhood complexity that would have created this thing. So you have BEE being one of the issues, and whether or not the colored community finds expression in that policy. You've got employment equity of late, and whether the colored community finds expression in that particular policy. And this is what would have then given rise to the Good Party, the Patriotic Alliance, and so on and so forth. A sizable chunk of that ANC vote from the colored community going to the Democratic Alliance. Are they over that? To say, if we put a Naledi Pandor there, she'll be able to draw all.
This is interesting. Yeah. So it's interesting. I don't think these questions should be taken lightly, because in choices of leaders are not just about faces and competences of those leaders, but the underlying ideas that are being pursued. So in its recent conference about 8 months ago, already the ANC has shown that on one level it actually prefers its democratic processes to be about who can mobilize the most and campaign and win. On another, it's a party that has to be sensitive to the outside gaze. How are we being looked at, and what does our choice of particular leaders mean to the critical observer? And indeed, this is not a problem that's unique to the ANC. It's the whole issue around the DA and how it's also won the 2019 election with a reduced margin. And by the way, the Western Cape, not necessarily in a similar way like Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, but it's also contested in the sense that a lot of the parties that have splintered from the Democratic Alliance are parties that are going for key constituencies in that province. So this is not an issue that is unique to the ANC. But while I think that the Mrs. Kwacha Ibrahim Rasool period, who had a direct, politics of representation issue, which was wider than that conflict.
Yeah.
It's interesting how the average voter, who would be ANC voter in that province, or a voter that is defecting from the DA to the ANC, whether for them Naledi Pandor's voice, again on the international stage and for the Muslim community, would actually count for something compared to one of the candidates that I think are also being considered, in terms of who is likely going to make it. But the point is, ultimately the ANC has got to make a choice. It's tried different things recently, and I think that if it thinks that the idea that Naledi Pandor represents, it has to test. I think like the Democratic Alliance, it has to test it. Yeah. The same way that the DA has appeared to be veering off the broad church pathway in order to go and contest the constituency that's going for the Freedom Front Plus. Yeah. The ANC also is going to have to make a strategic choice, especially. But fortunately for them, they only mainly have to make this choice in the Western Cape. In KwaZulu-Natal, it's different ideas. Yes. In Gauteng, it's different ideas to talk about the three provinces where, these strategic games matter the most. In the rest of the provinces, the chairperson of the party is number one on the list and has got no concerns about whether or not somebody can be parachuted from national to come and be the key candidate of the party in their province. It's interesting. It's interesting dynamics. in the same country.
Interesting. I was going to steal your thoughts a little bit in the last 2 minutes that we have, and I'm glad that you brought it up yourself. You brought up the province of KwaZulu-Natal. I'm thinking that in the context of what you just said now moments ago, that somehow they've reached this conclusion that, hey, listen, if you've got a constituency, you can bring them in and they go vote. We are willing to even park the party processes around step aside and whatever else. Go on the campaign, bring those people in, and that's where it seems they are at this particular point, to throw everybody out there who says, I've got a constituency, I can get them to vote, bring them in, let's go and vote. And then you've got this spark that just happened now in KwaZulu-Natal this past weekend. What do you think could possibly be happening there now? Because you have a king who is for the Zulu nation, not necessarily partisan. You have a prime minister who's clearly partisan. And you have a young fellow enthusiastic within the ANC who is the chairperson but not the premier at the moment. And you have the president who has to come in and put out this fire.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I heard, I think about a short while ago, I don't know whether it was an interview that was done here at Newzroom, where Ongama is said to have outlined a process to go and apologize to the king. And I think that that's a wise decision to do, because while it's interesting how what the provincial chair, Siboniso Duma, is up to as far as, you know, carving a path for the politicians vis-a-vis the monarchy and who is at liberty to do what, okay, in this issue. I think that he was of the view that he could behave in that way as the political head of the party and very close to the leading government, in the sense that there's no contestation between the kingdom and the province as to who leads in the province. Yeah. But so while debates may be had about the correctness of that, especially when it comes from within politicians who are, among politicians who are Zulu, it's an interesting debate. But as far as election season is concerned, it's a capital mistake. And I think that the ANC is doing the right thing by going there to apologize, because to navigate that tension between the monarchy and the, if you like, a Republican, if you like. Yeah.
I mean, simultaneously saying it would be naive for the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal to believe that they could have this antagonistic relationship with the Prime Minister of the Zulu nation, who is the mouthpiece, essentially, of the king, without being seen to be directly
absolutely
disrespecting the king.
Absolutely, because if you saw, for example, the statement of the IFP, it's already jumping on it, because that's unfortunately you cannot take behavior towards a member of the institution and isolate it from the attitude towards the institution itself, which is the institution of traditional leadership.
Dr. Ongama Mtimka, appreciate your time. Thank you very much, as always, sir.